Iran was never a colony, but it marks anti-British colonialism day each year on Shahrivar the 12th, which fell to September the 3rd this year. The day is a reminder of a potent British presence in Iran while commemorating efforts to thwart imperialist influence in this country by tribal fighters. It's the martyrdom anniversary of Rais Ali Delvari, who organized popular resistance in the south against British troops which had invaded Iran in 1915. In other words, Iran felt their boot even without the British being resident imperialism in this country. They first set their sights on Iran in the 19th century. But whenever something isn't quite right, Iranians suspect British involvement. Is it just paranoia based on a past reality, or is the past present? And are the British still policymakers, or do they simply follow a US policy of hostility and destruction in Iran and West Asia? For answers, stay with me, Leila Faramarzi, on Iran Today. The British, generally fair in court and chatty over a cuppa, can't boast their ancestors left the same impression when they ventured out as a modern power. World War I saw a neutral Iran occupied by British, Russian and Ottoman forces, with the Brits emptying this country of grain in the name of feeding their soldiers and the sort. About 10 million Iranians starved to death or were driven to deadly illness between 1917 and 1919. A massacre. The country's total population had been no more than 30 million. This trend of any means justifying the end continued into World War II and beyond, into the 1950s. Mr. Jalilvand is a British affairs analyst. He gave us an enlightened interview in the studio in his humble fashion before admitting to his postdoctorate degree from Oxford.
بعد از جنگ جهانی دوم
After World War II, the decline of the British Empire began. If you pay attention, the secession of India in 1949, the nationalization of the oil industry in Iran in 1953, and the nationalization of the Suez Canal in 1956 by Jamal Abdel Nasser marked the decline of the British Empire, which was 30 million square kilometers. It controlled such a vast expanse in its territory. But World War I and World War II, 25 years apart, weakened Britain and helped oppressed nations free themselves of British yoke.
The recent choice of British ambassador to this country did not help with Iranians' impression of Brits in politics. Simon Shercliffe has been a high-up intelligence serviceman. He was actually Director for National Security at the Foreign Office from February 2018. What never dies in Iranian minds was portrayed in a whole TV series which just ended this week on Sunday, September the 5th. Gondo portrays British meddling in this country to the point of menacing by drawing on real-life characters. Some TV critics say the series is too distant from facts on the ground and has sunk into fiction. All the same, it does trace a historic reality of the British presence, otherwise known as the English job. Mr. Shercliffe's reaction to the film is interesting. He says he utterly enjoys Gondo 2 anyway. And so, Iran's national TV chief Ali Askari suggested the British government broadcast the spy series on the BBC. Mr. Ahmadi has watched the series as though studying it. Mr. Ahmadi is an analyst who did us the honors of coming to Press TV studios. Let's hear him share his views with us.
In
the Gondo series, the main takeaway is, now that Americans aren't in Iran, the British are doing the Americans and the Western bloc's bidding in Iran, especially regarding a soft influence in the country's economy, politics, and also Iran's border issues and helping the separatists.
The said spy thriller series, Gondo 2, focuses on individuals spying for Britain and shows Iran's security apparatus detecting and neutralizing MI6 agents' plans to undermine this country's sovereignty. We are talking hostile plans that didn't subside, but apparently peaked over the past 10 years. Ganjo is a small crocodile indigenous to southeastern Iran, cunning and agile in hunting its prey.
ساختار سیستم MI6
The structure of the MI6 is different. If you refer to the book British Wage Earners in Iran, it names people that would astound you. They've been developing such a network for quite some time. It's been underway since the Qajar period and is now being directed by Freemasons and others. Many believe that the British have been behind most of the events happening in Iraq.
Some cases of British espionage or sabotage I'll mention throughout the program, as will our show guests. The story Ganjo begins with transferring someone detained across the border, a reminder of a like incident last year, and Muhammad, the hero, visits a border town to look into the case of a spy fanning the flames between Shia and Sunni. Along the line, he finds clues to links between Iran's nuclear deal negotiators and foreign powers, especially Britain.
I
think these were people who wanted to have good ties with the British government, and that's why they entered into a deal with them, although subconsciously. They thought that they'd provide the British with information and they'd receive some favours in return. The favours could be either personal or, as they thought, could be in line with Iran's national interests. We're facing both scenarios. That's why I'm not saying that they were ill wishers. Some of them think they're working for Iran's national interests as they're promoting reconciliation and making a deal between the two sides. But the British officials look at this differently. They deem it as a way of support. Iranian officials also look at this as cooperation and collaboration with foreigners.
There are no real names provided, but as the story develops, we get to know Ibrahim Sharif, Musa Purhadi Sabunchi, Abdur Rasul Ashrafi, and Bahadur Karimi, who are present at the talks directly or indirectly to submit Iran's confidential economic and political information to foreign parties. Many media outlets, in matching the film characters to real-life cases, discovered the real people they resemble, who are either detained, convicted, or on the run. Whether verdicts will overturn is another matter.
Because the United States cannot enter Iran easily, it has to use British agents or some nationals of other countries. The British are much more experienced than the Americans, especially because of their long-running studies of Iran and their experiences with the Iranians since the 19th century, and their agents who have been active in Iran for many years, both before and after the Islamic Revolution.
The series, which is directed by Javad Afshar and written by Arash Qaderi, believes even currency rate fluctuations over the past 4 years are down to British ringleading and some possibly former central bank managers. It explains how the British embassy grips onto one of the managers to assimilate 4 of his affiliates in that sensitive bank. And then it starts engineering currency market rates to increase the price of foreign currency. Not to point a finger at any individual, but this state of the economy would cause dissatisfaction and unrest in the country.
We even see that concerning economic matters, including Iran's financial and exchange market, Iran's assets abroad and the like. Britain needs accurate information in line with the interests of the US about how Iran copes with sanctions, for example, and that's why they use these kinds of people. Some might call it espionage, but words don't change the facts. We're seeing them as documented facts.
The exchange rates are engineered by supply management and psychological warfare. Charlotte, a high-ranking MI6 agent, maintains a physical presence in the currency market to accompany embassy affiliates in messing up the Iranian market.
The Western capitalist world is a closely integrated one. They might disagree on some topics, but they act in unison. According to Karl Marx, capitalism lacks 2 factors. One is religion, and the other a homeland. It has a global status. Britain was the driving force of the capitalist system for years. It's now left up to the US and retired to the back seat, but it continues to retain its influence and policies in West Asia. I'm certain that it has deep influences in all West Asian countries and has expertly laid out its chess pieces there.
The UK also has a long-standing entanglement with Iran, as does the USA. It was cut off from Iran, like the United States, by the Islamic Revolution, but Britain felt sore long before the revolution, when in the 1950s Iran nationalized its oil. The US may have been pleased Britain's pipeline to Iranian oil was severed, but the British got America to help them retaliate with what's known as the 1953 coup that toppled the oil nationalization-era government in Iran. Iranians to this day hold a grudge against both countries for their interference. And Brits and Americans just can't bear to let go of their seemingly loosening grip on this region. Not that the method has to make sense. Mr. Tabrizi is a historian we met at Ebrat Museum. The prison is a reminder of torture by Savak, the intelligence service, during the Shah's time. So I had to ask if an imperialist Britain and capitalist US could have had anything to do with physical torture.
Colonialism is colonialism. It's colonial in nature. The colonizers aren't enemies, they're friends. There might be some rivals between them, but that's as long as they want to dominate a region. If nations wake up, they will also unite. For example, during the constitutional revolution in Iran circa 1906, the nation won. But we see that in 1907, the Russian and British divided Iran among themselves. That's why they were both rivals. The Russians wanted to colonize Iran with their 1919 deal. If the deal had been implemented, the 1921 coup and ascension of Reza Khan to the throne would have not taken place, because Wusuq ad-Dawla and the members of the Lodge of Awakening would have done that. But when the deal broke down, their objective switched to changing the government and its structure.
And so the plot and fight continues, as is hinted at in Gonjo. Britain appears to be complementing US hostile actions against Iran and other countries in the region. For example, the United States has not fought in any war in the Middle East without Britain. The UK and US may be secret rivals, but they can't do without one another to hold on. Britain noticeably appears desperate to keep in with America since Brexit in 2020.
On the other hand, the Americans don't have the experience that the British do in Iran and the region, and they need a network of accurate geographical and ethnic information about Iran. They want to know about Iranians' habits and characteristics. They need to have relations with Iran's foreign opposition and other issues, which we mainly call soft power.
Time for a short break. We'll be back in no time. The so-called wars of 9/11, 20 years later, don't appear to have met any ends, never mind fulfilling evidently false premises they were based on. Twin Towers and an Al-Qaeda explosion? To this day, no one knows for certain it wasn't an inside job. The British and American people have also had enough of these senseless wars. In 2015, YouGov revealed that support for West Asia or Middle East intervention had collapsed from 2/3 to 1/3 since 2003. A similar fall from 63% to 38% were recorded by YouGov America. By November 2019, the US had spent under $6.5 trillion on almost 2 decades of wars with more than 7,000 military dead. Britain had lost over 630. The justification was not satisfying. There's plenty more to relate from history and on current affairs, and we will return with what we've time for. But in the meantime, a quick media review indoors to see what other outlets have to say. And here's how the news words it. The Financial Tribune reads, collective efforts free from foreign meddling key to regional stability. President Ebrahim Raisi stressed the importance of solving issues in the region through dialogue, saying neighborly cooperation free from foreign interference is a prerequisite for regional stability and security. Cooperation and synergy among regional countries without foreign interference are prerequisites for regional stability and security, the establishment of peace in countries of the region and welfare of its nations, Raisi said in a meeting with visiting Iraqi Foreign Minister Thwart in Tehran. Iran believes that dialogue among regional countries aimed at finding solutions to the existing problems and improving relations would promote security and stability, while foreign meddling in the region's affairs would increase tensions, he stressed. Tasnim News points to nuclear deal talks. Iran not to allow JCPOA talks to feature irrelevant issues. A high-ranking Iranian diplomat said Tehran would resolutely stand by its assertion that neither the JCPOA talks nor the nuclear deal are allowed to feature any irrelevant subject matter such as Iran's defensive missile program or its regional influence. Kazem Gharibabadi, Iran's permanent ambassador to Vienna-based international organizations, made the remarks in an interview reflecting on a warning issued by leader of the Islamic Revolution Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei about the West's intention to use the 2015 nuclear deal to enable interference in the country's affairs. The US left the agreement, which is officially known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA, in 2018. It then reimposed the inhumane sanctions that the deal had partially lifted and started forcing other countries into abiding by the coercive economic measures too. Its threesome European allies in the accord, the UK, France and Germany, were quick to align themselves with Washington's new approach. In a move pointed out by the leader, they have been trying to advance a provision that could pave the way for their meddling in the Islamic Republic's affairs. And that would be it for this segment. Do stay tuned. If the Brits and Americans continue with hopeless wars because of an illusion of colonial grandeur from a time past, Iran is known as the world's first empire, a benevolent empire 2,500 years ago. Yet it doesn't go capturing weaker countries because of some delusion of what can be.
Since Fath Ali Shah's rule, we have witnessed the betrayals, troublemaking, and crimes of the British in Iran. The British were to blame for one of the betrayals against Iran during the Iran-Russia war. They're the ones who separated Herat from Iran and deployed troops in Bushehr and committed crimes there.
Since after Iran's Islamic Revolution, the UK has always acted in hostile fashion. For example, in 1980, the country cut ties with Tehran, mostly due to the US embassy takeover in November 1979 and closure of that embassy at the request of Washington itself. The Den of Spies, as Iran named that embassy. An attack on the Iranian embassy in London won't have come as a total surprise. Soon after the US embassy, the UK closed its Tehran mission. Around the same time, the Iranian embassy in London was forcefully occupied by a group of 6 anti-Islamic Republic pan-Arabist gunmen. They identified themselves with the Democratic Revolutionary Front for the Liberation of Arabistan, DRFLA, which actually meant Iran's Khuzestan province of Persians and Arabs. It was perceived to be a Carter-Thatcher conspiracy executed by Iraqi hands.
This has been the usual MO of the British since World War II to support minorities in different countries to pressure the others. This leaves those regional countries in a perpetual state of weakness and tension. When the UK throws its weight behind the minority in some countries to get to power, for example in Bahrain, the minority needs backing to stay in power. This makes them dependent on London in the long run.
British influence, or Britain's pan-American influence, doesn't have to be direct. It has the UN to wield as its weapon, especially with America at its side. And so it can support and prop up all anti-Iranian plans and sanctions in the United Nations and likes.
In defining colonialism, we say it has had 3 stages. The first was the old colonialism, like the military occupation of India by the British government. The second is neo-colonialism, like bringing to power Reza Khan in Iran, Ataturk in Turkey, and Faisal in Iraq. In this type of colonialism, they actually bring in their own people. There's also a trans-colonialism that starts from international institutions, media, and universities. This is a type of colonialism the U.S. is at the forefront. It's the neo-colonists' move to fight back.
Another means of indirect meddling in Iranian affairs is supporting wannabe overthrowers of the Islamic Republic, sheltering separatists and monarchists. At the other end of the overthrowing spectrum, we've also got the MEK. Now, the MEK is a whole different story. Otherwise known as the hypocrites, they are heavily armed, and they're a cult-like terror group that fought alongside Iraq against Iran in the 1980s. Traitors, so to speak. And these groups don't just exist. They're voiced by anti-Iranian Persian language opposition news networks launched by or allowed to be launched by the UK in the UK. Iran International is one. It is owned by Volant Media that has a director named Adil Abdul Karim, who is a Saudi national and known to put Saudi funds behind the channel. Now, this channel began operating in 2017 when relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia were sore. BBC Persian TV, on the other hand, was launched in mid-January 2009, just months before the post-election riots in Iran. Could be just a coincidence. It's in the name of freedom of expression that the UK has become a safe haven for groups opposing the Islamic Republic. Hence, the launching of set channels and moving around money by Iranians of the opposition.
Since Britain created the BBC radio years ago, it's been gathering opponents of Iran and training them. I don't want to talk about conspiracy theories that I personally believe in, but the BBC is funded by the British government. The outlet claims to be working independently, but it receives funding from the government. A vast majority of its employees are like George Orwell, who was a spy and worked for the BBC. A majority of them have ties with intelligence services in West Asia and other regions of the world. Naturally, when London opposes a country, it will gather the opposition members and provides them with services.
It's no secret the UK has blocked Iran's access to its assets. It was reported in 2009 to have frozen $1.64 billion in Iranian assets, actually, under the EU and UN sanctions against Iran. The UN Security Council imposed 3 sets of sanctions on this country between 2006 and 2009 over its nuclear program, while Tehran said its program was designed only to generate electricity. I asked if withholding blocked Iranian money is the UK's own decision or if it is waiting for a green light from the USA before it releases the funds. A lot more money has safely crept into the UK from Iran, so the question holds.
Britain has had trade relations with Iran for years after the Islamic Revolution. It can claim that it can't return Iran's funds because we no longer have trade ties because of the sanctions. This claim isn't valid. The UK has had trade relations with Iran for decades, even after the Islamic Revolution. Also, after the JCPOA was signed, all sanctions were lifted in the first couple of years, giving the UK the chance to pay back what it owed, but it didn't.
UK intervention has, of course, not always been indirect. In fact, it has been physically hostile on occasion, as recently as just over 2 years ago. The UK illegally detained a tanker carrying Iranian oil in international waters, claiming it was transporting oil to Syria in violation of the EU sanctions. That was on July the 4th, 2019, years after the 2015 nuclear deal which it violated.
In 2019, Britain embarked on an adventure in the Mediterranean Sea. It seized an Iranian tanker that was carrying Iranian oil to West Asia. It was later revealed that this was done at the request of the United States. Iran could not get its oil tanker back through negotiations. This was while no international law allowed such a seizure. After a while, Iran demonstrated a strong reaction to this, forcing the UK to release the tanker. This shows the decline of Britain's hard power. It also indicated the US influence in issues related to ties between Iran and the UK.
British meddling here began 2 centuries ago. Whether it will go on much longer is not known. To see where Anglo-Iranian relations will lead and hear all else that's to be known about Iran, tune in again at the same times next week and each week after. Thanks for watching. Until then, bye.